From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
What the heck is going on here, you guys?
Corner hammer.
I knew there was some kind of blitz coming.
You got 18 seconds on the play clock to decide what to do.
Am I supposed to keep looking forward, or can I?
We tried to tell them about your peripheral vision.
Is that right?
The Peyton Manning stuff was unbelievably cool.
Yeah,
bringing out the coaches
and the coaches behind him or whatever. And,
like super goosebumps, like geeking out. Like, my goodness. I mean, look, just because the presentation of it, and then they had the stuff up on the board, and they brought David Baker out to congratulate him right there on the freaking field. I mean, that was cool.
Yeah,
it was great.
I thought it was cool. I didn't get goosebumps, but I mean, everybody knew Peyton Manning was going to make it. I mean,
I know, but when his kids ran out and jumped into his arms.
To me, that was the coolest part, because then he was like, "Did you guys know?" And they're like, "Yeah."
That was cool, man.
Yeah, I thought that was really, and getting the coaches out there and everything. That was it was fun. That was cool, and it's good to see Peyton kind of in his element, like, "Oh shucks, you guys got one over on me," whatever. But and trying to play like he didn't. But it was. He
probably had a
little
bit of an idea.
I mean, as soon as you see your producer like dressed up because he's going to be on camera, that should tip you off.
Probably. But it was still a very cool moment, and we knew you knew he was going to get in. But I think that's the beauty of it, is like, he's going to get in. How can we do something extra for this
make
guy?
It fun and all that
because
kind of stuff.
as John Elway, the quote that made the circulation, I mean, he's one of a kind. Like I will never see a quarterback do it like him. And the same thing with Tom Brady. Like, I don't know if we'll ever see a quarterback get to 7 championships. Like,
probably not. I mean, we didn't think that anybody would ever pass Joe Montana.
True, but he's gone to 10.
And how difficult is that in the free agent era?
Well, that's right. That's what I'm saying. Like eventually,
Joe had the benefit of continuity with a lot of those because he was right on the cusp of the free agent era. It's been harder for Tom Brady to do it.
But look at us sitting here like today, and what the quarterback carousel, like you're tweeting out right before the show, all the stuff going on with the Chicago Bears and the domino that represents for other teams. We might see, or maybe we won't, but there's a possibility of maybe 10 quarterbacks changing hands, or 10 new starting quarterbacks this next upcoming year, depending on what happens in the draft and where these guys slot in. So I'm just saying, like, that alone makes it for just such a fascinating idea of development and investment. Like, just think about that. Like, Jared Goff is a number 1 overall pick. You traded a lot of picks just to get to there, to draft Jared Goff. He survived a coach firing. He caught on with Sean McVay. Sean McVay turned that dude into a good quarterback. Not a great quarterback, but a good quarterback.
A serviceable quarterback.
Yeah. And the investment lasted as long as they could make it. But even that guy gets moved. Like, he would have been a guy, look, for a while there, I wondered if he would represent, and Mason and I used to talk about this all the time, he would represent the first quarterback that a team would decide not to re-sign simply because Sean McVay would kind of get bored of him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In the end, they did, and then, they made the swap, so now they get Stafford out there.
But I still thought it was a far-fetched idea, like the concept of it, because it's like, you draft a guy number 1 overall, he turns into a serviceable quarterback. That's usually good enough in this league.
Good enough isn't good enough, though. That's the problem. That's why we have so many people in the mentions all the time with the, all the other stuff. And Peyton Manning, it's interesting to me because the modern passing era is defined. He's the this is going to sound a little weird, but like, we measure time by Jesus, basically, the BCAD thing. And that's who we measure the golden era of passing by, It starts with Peyton Manning. The new golden era of passing really started with Peyton Manning. The other thing is Peyton Manning really made it possible for a lot of these guys that you wouldn't think, a lot of these guys that don't play anything like him to have success in the NFL. Peyton Manning brought running the offense at the line of scrimmage to the NFL. And that's where guys like Lamar and Kyler Murray and the things that they do are possible now.
Well, think about what he did for shotgun.
Right.
Like running out of shotgun.
Right, out of shotgun, and then out of, but at the coming out of the huddle and running the offense, like that. And those kinds of the quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, who have to have that in order to take advantage of their legs, wouldn't have the, checking out of a heavy box and, checking into a light box, those kinds of things. Like, you wouldn't have that without Peyton Manning kind of pioneering that was possible at the NFL level. So, he did a lot more for the game than just, than just put up a bunch of yards and touchdowns. He kind of changed the way you did things. They went. Offensive lines used to be just the biggest, fattest, most powerful people you could find, and Peyton Manning wanted more agile offensive line. They wanted to go shotgun. They wanted to go a little bit up tempo. They wanted to have those running backs that are able to move out of the shotgun. You need a more agile offensive lineman for that. So, part of that is Alex Gibbs and the zone blocking scheme. Part of that's Peyton Manning and how he did. But, offensive linemen are much more nimble than they used to be, in better shape than they used to be. And so, I think that I think there's the trickle-down effect of his fingerprint on the game is kind of interesting to see.
Which is why we kind of point back to the fact that you're just never going to see anything like that ever again. Not in the way that it was done.
Right.
You'll see quarterbacks drafted high. You'll see teams work with them. But there was something about he established a bit of a brand of offense, right? As you're kind of laying out there.
Right.
And that is something that you don't often see. You don't get a chance, really, I think, with any of these guys. Maybe you build around the strengths of some of your top draft picks, right, at quarterback. But it's not always the case that they get to come in and sort of dictate in some ways. Now, Peyton didn't right away. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it wasn't until Thomas More and all that, they started working together. But I'm just saying, that's something that I also find very unique.
Yeah, Peyton Manning's first year was bad.
Yeah, set the rookie record for interceptions.
Right, it's and people were worried that he was a bust. Like that was the conversation that was going on. His first 2 seasons, you had beat writers talking about Peyton Manning was a bust, and it's funny to see that, especially when you juxtapose that with the quarterback situation here, not getting time to develop all the way that he needed to. And that kind of thing. And I think that's why Peyton Manning, in a recent interview, pointed out some of that kind of stuff about time to develop and, and those kinds of things. There's a famous quote, and I've referenced it on the show many times, about guys being open in the NFL. He called his dad, in the middle of that interception season or whatever. Dad's nobody's open. He's like, son, you get to the NFL, you got to throw them open. Peyton Manning learned how to do that, and it really paid dividends late in the career.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, we chat with George Stoia from the Colorado Springs Gazette. What does he want to see the Broncos do at quarterback? We'll talk about it next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Let's head out to the hotline and bring on George Stoia. You can give him a follow on Twitter at George Stoia. He is writes for the CS Gazette, Colorado Springs Gazette, also the Denver Gazette, and he covers the Broncos. Give me your perception on what has been holding this team back. What are some of the reasons why they've been struggling over the past several years as a guy kind of coming in with some fresh eyes?
Well, I think it's obvious you have to start with the quarterback situation. You look at the guys they've had back there since, Peyton Manning retired, really, and it's just been kind of a struggle. And, obviously they've been through, several guys with Paxton Lynch and Brock Osweiler and, all those guys. And you look at Drew Lock, obviously, this past season and his ups and downs, and I know he showed some promise there at the end, but I think that's kind of where you have to start. But I think you also look at some of the different areas. I think that you even go to the head coach. I think Vic Fangio has come in and done a decent job, but, 2 losing seasons. They've missed the playoffs both times that he's been there. So this is a big, 3rd year that he's going into. Obviously, they missed with Vance Joseph. I think those have been the key issues as head coach and quarterback. But you can also even go down the line, and I know, we might get into this, but I know everybody wants to talk about what they're going to do with Drew Lock and if they're going to trade for a guy or draft a guy. But, they have a lot of holes in other places. I think Justin Simmons has to be a priority. I think he is. You look at the cornerback situation. I think those are some big holes right there that they have to go get some more depth there, maybe through the draft, maybe through free agency. You look at right tackle. I think that's an issue that they need to address this offseason. I know Juwan James is coming back next year, but that's another position that I think they really need to look strongly at, is improving on the offensive line. And then again, quarterback is another one that you have to point at. And so I think there's a lot of different things that they need to get better at. And does a Deshaun Watson type player come in and fix all that? I don't know. It kind of, maybe depends on what you have to give up. And so, I think that from my outsider's perspective, I guess is kind of where it starts is, do you go and get that top level quarterback this offseason, or do you, fix some of those other holes and maybe wait to go get them in 2022 and maybe give Drew Lock another shot to be the guy next year.
Now, for the Broncos, they're at an interesting crossroads, right? Because they could stay the course with Drew Lock in that development, but simultaneously they could head for another season of kind of mediocrity at the position. It may not be good enough, and especially when you look at the rest of the division kind of improving around them. So based on, I guess, your take on the situation and based on some of the feedback you've received, what do you think is probably the best course of action right now?
I think they can go one of two ways. And I think really watching the Super Bowl last night kind of made me think they should go this way, which is try to fill some of those holes that I mentioned earlier. I think that if you can get a guy like Deshaun Watson, of course you try to make that happen. But if you don't want to give up too much. And so I think that they can go one of two ways. And that's either, fixing some of those holes that I mentioned, right tackle, maybe going after a linebacker like Micah Parsons. I think last night watching what Levante David did and Devin White and Shaq Barrett, those guys, what they were able to do to the Chiefs. I think, you have to really strongly consider going after a guy like Micah Parsons at number 9, or maybe, you go after a corner, Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain out of Alabama at number 9, and maybe you go and get Ohio State's Baron Browning, there in the second or third round, and fill some of those holes, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think that would be the best course of action is going forward and trying to fill some of those holes around Drew Lock, around the rest of the team. And again, giving Drew Lock one more season. And I think if you can bring in, a veteran quarterback that can compete with him, a guy like maybe Andy Dalton is somebody that I would be interested in if I were the Broncos, somebody that, obviously has taken a lot of NFL snaps, has played a lot of football games and can come, compete and push Drew Lock, or maybe you go after a rookie. I'm really high on Mac Jones. If you could somehow get a guy like that and not give up, too many draft picks to either, move back or move forward or whatever to get Mac Jones, I think that, that could be a reliable option. And then obviously the second option that I was talking about is going after a Deshaun Watson and giving up a lot for him. I just don't personally think that, that's the smartest move if you have to give up, say a Bradley Chubb and maybe another defensive starter and 2 or 3 first-round picks and even more picks. I think Deshaun obviously comes in here and makes this team a playoff team, but is it a team that can beat the Chiefs? I don't know. I think they're better off maybe trying to fill some of those other holes, give Drew another season. If Drew proves he's the guy, then you move forward and keep, building around him. If he doesn't, then maybe you go get your future quarterback in 2022, which I think is going to be actually a really good draft for quarterback.
Do you think the team is better served by going with the Drew Lock draft pick method and trying to find the guy in the draft rather than trying to solve this via free agency?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, again, I don't want to make too much of one game because I know it's just one game and anything can happen in a Super Bowl. But you look at, the Chiefs are the team everybody's chasing, right? I mean, even if they lost last night, they are still the team that everybody's chasing, especially for the Broncos being in their division. And you watch the way the Buccaneers won that game last night. And it's as much credit goes to Tom Brady for how good he is. Tom Brady wasn't the biggest difference maker, in my opinion, last night. It was that Buccaneers defense. And I know Kansas City was down a couple tackles, but they were able to get after Patrick Mahomes. They took, Tyreek Hill out of the game by playing over the top. And so I think if you can get, some good edge rushers in there, you keep a guy like Bradley Chubb, who has grown a lot, made his first Pro Bowl this last season despite missing a couple games. You keep a guy like Shelby Harris. Maybe you go get another edge rusher. You get a guy like, again, Micah Parsons. I watching that game last night, I just thought, if the Buccaneers can do this with these great linebackers that they've got, maybe you can bring in a Micah Parsons who can be a difference maker and start from day one and be a catalyst on that defense. And then you can go maybe get a free agent corner that's played a lot of football, or maybe you do draft the corner or whatever. But that's what I would focus on, that defensive side of the ball, because, again, I think you look at some of these teams that are competing at the highest level, they have great defenses. And I think with Vic Fangio in place, Fangio has shown that he knows how to call great defenses.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, we talk about Vic Fangio. What can he accomplish in his third year? We'll get to it next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
We did have a question on the text line. What are your thoughts on the hire of Christian Parker as the DB's coach, and do we think special teams could be next?
I think they're looking into those things. I liked Ronaldo Hill. I think there is a loss there.
Yeah.
In that. But that follows the Vic Fangio model, which is hire young up-and-comers, coach them up, and then have them move on. He's got his trusted guy in Ed Donatell's with him, and then, he hires a bunch of young guys like Brandon Staley and those kind of guys to kind of do the other things and be the high-energy guys. And that makes a lot of sense. I think if you're an older coach who may be not relatable to your players in some ways, I mean, because you're Vic Fangio, you're 60-something years old. What are you going to have in common with a 24-year-old kid? How are you going to relate to them,
It's interesting you bring that up because Bruce Arians was hired late in his career, right? He was, I think he was 60 when he finally got his first.
He and Vic Fangio were like the same age when they got their first gig.
Finally got their first head coaching gig. And look at Bruce Arians. I mean, he's one of the more obviously became the oldest head coach to win a Super Bowl. I'm not sitting here trying to tell everybody that Vic Fangio is on the same career path. But the fact is, it's not impossible. Sometimes we get told that, like, oh, well, if you're not hiring the next young up-and-coming offensive mind, then you're doing it wrong. I thought that was kind of interesting with Bruce Arians. He's the oldest head coach to ever win a Super Bowl. And I was thinking about Vic Fangio and how for Vic Fangio also, who got hired late in his career, like what it means. And I'm looking at, the record history here of Bruce Arians and what he's able to do. He was an interim in 2012 in Indy. They went 9-3 that year. Then he went to Arizona, you remember, and he actually was really good there. I mean, right off the bat, 10-win season, 11-win season, 13-win season. They had some consistency at quarterback. Do you remember that? He had the option of that. Then he went 7-win and 8-win before he eventually kind of retired. Came back 7-9 last year at Tampa Bay, and then they won a championship this year. But he is a guy that you sort of wonder, Vic Fangio has, 2 losing seasons right off the bat, has had, 7 different quarterbacks in that time. What would it mean if he had some kind of quarterback consistency? What could that do for Vic Fangio as he's trying to establish himself and establish kind of the overall style of coaching he wants to be?
Yeah, I think that's why they're going to basically run it back this year. This is the thing. Like Vic Fangio, okay, here's your consistency. We had all the injuries and the COVID and all that kind of stuff. Here's your chance to show you this is the team you wanted to put together. These are the coaches that you wanted. So we'll run it back with that. And if you're, and we'll see. And I think that's kind of where they're at. It's like either you're going to sink or swim. And then you got a new general manager, so he's like, all right, well, this is your audition year. This is you got everything you wanted. Let me get everything you want in the draft and all that kind of stuff. Put it together and let's go. And if you're able to do it, then cool. And we know to build around that. If not, then we're staring a defensive rebuild in the face anyway. We'll reload, rebuild, and look at something else. And George Payton comes from a 4-3 background, not a 3-4. I mean, he comes from a kind of a different background in terms of what they do defensively, what they've looked for in terms of personnel defensively. So, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if he'll necessarily default to that or default to the coach and how that'll work. But, you have a team that's on the verge and they need to go one way. You're at the fork in the road. You got to go one way or the other this season. And that's the way it's going to go for the Broncos.
Yeah. And one more thing I want to say on this before we move to the poll question. I don't want to hear any more of we can keep Vic Fangio on as defensive coordinator because he's a brilliant defensive mind. That's not going to happen.
It's not at all going to happen.
Yeah, so if they do move on from Vic Fangio.
Who's still saying that? I know there's some nerds in town
people out there.
That.
Yeah, there's still people out there. Okay. I see it every so often in my mentions. Like, wouldn't it be great if they could somehow convince Vic Fangio to stay on as the defensive coordinator?
Absolutely not happening.
No, that's not going to happen. And so just we can put that to bed. We can move on from that. This is his audition. He wants to be a head coach. That's another thing that I've heard is that maybe Vic Fangio is in over his head, doesn't want to be a head coach. And it's like,
wouldn't take the job if you didn't want to be a head coach.
These opportunities don't come around very often. There's only 32 of them in the whole world.
Right.
And when you get these, you take advantage of it. And I think Vic Fangio, he has something to show us this year. I'm excited to see what it's going to be. At this point, he's going to have more consistency on the other side of the ball. We know he's a defensive-minded coach, and we know that he tends to approach the way he formulates a game plan, the way that he attacks opposing teams is from the defensive mindset. So he's got to have more consistency on the offense. One of the reasons he brought in Pat Shurmur is he wanted to trust his OC. He wanted to bring in a level of consistency, and Shurmur definitely represents that over Rich Scangarello. Scangarello might have more upside over the long term. We'll never really know. But Pat Shurmur, we know what he is. And so with Pat Shurmur and, of course, Mike Shula, have to do is they have to either get Drew Lock ready to play this year and bring that level of consistency on the offensive side of the ball, or they got to go in a new direction. But what's fascinating about all of this, as you put it in the framework of Vic Fangio also has to win this year. And so if he's not winning, then what does that mean? And what decision do they make a quarterback in order to put themselves in best position to do that?
Well, right. And that's the thing. It's like Vic Fangio has improved this team across the board. There's a better mentality. It's not a defeatist like there was under Vance Joseph. The guys play hard. They don't give up. They're not checking out like they were under Vance Joseph. It's night and day. I mean, if you've ever been around football a moment in your life, you know the difference between these two, that they're not comparable at all. That said, it's not shown up in the win column. Everything else has gotten better. It just hasn't shown up in the win column. And so that's where Vic what he needs to do this year. It has to show up in the win column.